This is a podcast where a real medical professional and me, an absolutely unqualified amateur, discuss fake medical emergencies. Obviously, this podcast is no substitute for actual medical advice. If you think you're having a medical emergency, please seek out real medical attention. And if you're going to listen to this in the ER waiting room, then for the love of God, put in headphones.
Hi, everybody. This is Jackson Vane.
I'm Johnny Kolosinski. You might remember me from such podcasts as It's.com, a Homestar Runner review. This is a podcast about fake medicine on fake TV.
Well, it's real TV.
Real TV.
But also real movies, but just done really, really badly.
Yeah. Jackson is a real doctor.
Yep. I'm a real doctor. Just watches a lot of TV, watch a lot of movies, just noticing a lot of bad stuff. So we're going to just talk about some really weird and just abnormal cases that we've noticed recently.
All right. And you might have caught us at Comic-Con this year, 2019, where we did a panel with a bunch of physicians and a bunch of bootleg movie clips.
Oh, so many bootleg movie clips. And we're today we're going to do a deep dive on one of those movie clips that we did at the panel.
What are we discussing today?
We're going to discuss Shooter. It's the 2007 movie with Mark Wahlberg. It was pretty well received when we discussed it, but there were a lot of things we didn't touch on because of just how time constrained we were. So we're just going to do a little deeper dive in it today.
I feel like we could do a Mark Wahlberg month.
Oh, yeah.
Planet of the Apes.
Perfect Storm, probably.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of good ones.
I'm guessing that's not how drowning works.
I mean, wet drowning. I mean, we see dry drowning all the time in the ER, but that doesn't exist. But that's another subject.
All right. So what's the first thing you want to talk about in Shooter?
So I think the first thing we'll talk about is just in the beginning, or towards the first third or so, when he gets shot and they're chasing him down and he's losing blood and he has to stabilize himself.
Wait, Shooter gets shot?
I know.
Huh.
I mean, it's in the title. The shooter himself gets shot and now he's on a manhunt.
The shooter has become the shootee.
Correct. And what happens is he needs to get some nutrition into him and he needs to establish an IV. So he goes to the convenience store while he's being under a manhunt, cleverly takes out all the electricity so he can walk in and give cash just so he can collect some tubing, some salt, some sugar, and then he finds a marinade needle somewhere and then proceeds to give himself an IV to give him the proper electrolytes to survive long enough to seek refuge in someone's house.
Okay.
There's so many things that we need to talk about that.
We'll have if you're listening to this on something where you can click into it, you can check the show notes for a link to a bootleg video of it on YouTube.
Yep. Please don't report us and take down our clip. But I think the first thing that we need to talk about is just, does this work? And, you know, in the ER, we do end up giving patients saline fluid, which is essentially just salt water, but to the right osmolarity of your own blood. The problem is if you mix too much or too little, that can cause damage to certain parts of your body. So, like your blood cells, if you put too little salt or sugar in, if you remember all your osmotic pressures and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. From Osmosis
yes.
301.
Yeah, or Osmosis Jones or whatever like that. The big thing is if you have if something's concentrated in one area, things tend to move to less concentrated areas. So if your blood cell has a certain concentration of electrolytes and whatnot, and the outside has less, physics-wise, it should move out of the cell and into that part. Actually, sorry, it's the opposite direction. My bad. So the water is going to move into the cell to make it more dilute, and if that water moves into the cell, it's going to make it explode.
That's bad.
That's bad. So your blood cells bursting is a bad thing.
Noted. You can take notes on this.
The other thing is if you have too dilute of water going into your veins, it can potentially go to your brain, cause brain cells to swell. Your brain swells, and then you herniate, which means your brain actually swells into your brainstem, or your brainstem goes into your spinal canal, and then you die too. Okay. So we'll see that in patients when families dilute their formula too much.
Really?
Yeah. So towards the end of the month, especially for financially hardship families, they will mix the formula with extra water just to get them through until the next supply comes through.
That's insane.
So then you'll have babies come in with seizures and potentially die because of how they're trying to stretch out the last bits of formula they can.
This is not a political podcast, but I'm just going to encourage all of you to think about that for a second, because that's nuts.
Yeah, so we'll see that at the end of the month for those families too. But that's one part. The other part is if he mixes sugar in there, we do use sugar on your diabetic patients that took too much insulin and are like comatose, kids with seizures that have hypoglycemia, and we'll give them an amp of sugar, which is just a push of almost like syrup into the bloodstream, and that kind of raises up your blood glucose and can actually just make you come back too. However, if you put too much with the salt in there, you can essentially just block off your whole blood cell or your blood vein and die.
Because you're basically putting marinade in there.
Yeah. Well, he did use a marinade needle, so the
checks out.
It checks out, so he'll be ready for Thanksgiving and be good on that part. So that one really caught me. The other part was just how he put in the IV. And you kind of want to go flat and pretty much parallel. I'm trying to gesture it to Johnny right now, but we're basically going flat against the skin, almost parallel, right into the vein. And he went 90 degrees right into the elbow. And you're not going to hit anything other than bone. If you're lucky, you'll get it, but the chances are you'll probably go straight through. Mm-hmm. Also, it's not...
So if you're going parallel, you're going into the vein as opposed to through the vein, hopefully.
Good examples is like if you watch any scene where a junkie is shooting up, they're not putting the needle straight into their elbow, right? Mm-hmm. They're tying it off, they're holding it with their teeth, and then just slowly...
Holding their arm straight.
Holding their arm straight and putting it in there. But it's really hard to find your vein. If you're that dehydrated too, or you've lost a lot of blood, your blood vessels are going to just all be collapsed. So the odds of you putting in essentially what is the diameter of a basketball inflating needle into your veins is pretty hard. Plus, it's really blunt. If you think about it. Like a marinade needle, if you've ever stabbed your turkey and tried to make it juicier, it's not super sharp. It's very blunt. So it doesn't work as well.
So what would the effect be of, normal Mark Wahlberg and homemade
marinade
sugar salt IV?
It's gonna burn a lot.
Ooh.
Yeah. If you had any wound and you put salt on it, it's gonna really, really burn. So that part's gonna really suck for him. The sugar part won't feel that bad, but you might get a burst of energy for a little bit. And if he's lucky and he mixed everything right, he'll feel okay. But if he mixed anything wrong, he'll start kind of getting woozy, decompensating pretty quickly, and pretty much die soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is generally not good for the plot.
No, and I mean, that's what he's trying to do, is, trying to stave off death just for a little longer, just so he can make it to Sarah Fenn, played by Kate Mara's house, just to get refuge and get surgery eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what could they have done to... Well, number one, is this something... What's Shooter's background in this? Is he ex-military?
I'm checking right now to see. I guess he's ex-military, but I'm not 100% sure right now.
Is this the sort of thing that somebody would, with field medicine experience, able to kind of do? Maybe.
I mean, if you had measuring tools and a scale and all that stuff, yeah, maybe. Mm-hmm. But definitely they wouldn't do that first. You would just try to control the pressure, the bleeding where you can, and then try to get help. I know he's on a manhunt and he's trying his best not to get caught or anything like that, but doing that is potentially going to kill him faster than
the other shooters.
Refuge first. Yeah, he probably could have just made it to that person's house and gotten help before doing all of that extra stuff. But yeah, and it sounds like he was like an assassin, and then also, just ex-military. Oh, he's a rogue secret. He's being hunted down. He's a force recon veteran, which I'm not sure what that is. I'm not military, but he's also being hunted down by a private military company. So that's what it is.
Okay. So for this scene, let's say, well, we want to have a scene where Mark Wahlberg is a badass, because we haven't seen that enough in film.
Well, yeah.
He deserves finally his time to shine.
Yeah.
And so we want him to essentially operate on himself or give himself first aid.
Okay.
What would, if you were medical advisor for Shooter, what would you say as a way to have a similar stake scene
I mean, if he's like this really badass rogue agent, he probably has a field kit somewhere, and he'll probably have something called Quick Clot, which will it just expands and closes up the wound, stop the bleeding.
It's Fix-A-Flat for
bad bleeds, basically.
Okay.
And that actually is available around too, and that's one of those big initiatives that first aid, EMS providers, and even ER providers kind of are trying to set up.
Like Narcan.
Kind of like Narcan, but they're also trying to get it in those AED places. So the things where you see wherever you get shocked, the one where you pull out to defibrillate people, they're actually putting those in there now too. So if someone gets shot or has a significant bleed, they can actually put the Quick Clot on, pull it, it turns into an epoxy kind of.
Oh wow, it's like a patch.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
So that's one thing he can potentially do. And I feel like if he was one of those people, he would have one of those things. He probably would have like
an would know to look for it.
Exactly. Or have like a go kit, EpiPen for him. That'll maintain his blood pressure.
Better than the sugar would.
Correct. Because that would cause all of his blood vessels to constrict, allow him to get flow to his brain, and allow him to keep running and moving. So those are probably the big things. And
but would they make him as delicious?
Which one?
EpiPen.
I mean,
compared to a nice gentle based,
it'll still hurt, but not as delicious. I mean, he can try it, but he's probably just going to be gummier and stringier because it just makes everything much more tense.
Dang,
I know.
There's nothing like a dry, stringy Wahlberg.
It's a give and take, It's either an alive Wahlberg or a bad Wahlberg. But
you got to sous vide your Wahlbergs, guys.
That'll keep it tender and go pretty well, I would say.
All right.
And then, I think the follow-up scene is right when he gets to safety. Mm-hmm. And then they actually find someone who's willing to do surgery on him.
They find a Dr. Nick.
Yeah, essentially that's what it is because her qualifications are just as good as Dr. Nick's. But they get to her house and he was thinking ahead and bought a lot of cans of whipped cream for this part. And the whipped cream was helpful for him to pass out as he did a lot of whippets just so that he can get surgery performed on him.
If you attended our Comic-Con panel, you know that we do not recommend doing whippets.
Nope. I know some of our providers knew a lot about it, but I can say they did not use it. Wink. But we can just stop at that part.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he does whippets and he's just out completely while she's digging around removing the bullet.
And what is a whippet?
Whippet is usually like nitrous oxide, causes you to pass out. It makes you really dissociate more than anything. Sometimes there's a mild anesthetic effect. It's laughing gas. Mm-hmm. So it's what you use when you go to the dentist's office. The good thing about whippets is it doesn't fully make you not breathe anymore unless you do such a high concentration that it knocks you out. So you can preserve some of your breathing. So that's why it's good for him because technically he's under anesthesia.
And it is an anesthesia that people actually use, not just recreational.
Yeah, and we use it more. I mean, there's a difference between... I mean, it is an anesthesia, but it's more like a sedative more than anything. And it's an anxiolytic, so it removes anxiety as well. So those are all good things there. But the problem is... it's very short acting and you need a constant supply to keep you under. Mm-hmm. And usually you need to mix it with oxygen too, because if you're not mixing it at the right dose, you can potentially cause anoxia of the brain and die. Which is bad.
Anoxia is lack of oxygen.
Correct. Yeah. And that's why you'll see people like, I think Steve-O was one of those people, one of the jackass people. He used to do whippet cans all the time, and he actually slipped into seizures because of that. And because he wasn't getting oxygen in the brain, that's why he was having seizures. And that's a big concern with this scene, too, is if he did a lot of whippets and to the point where he passed out, the risk of him potentially having seizures is really high. So that's one issue. Mm-hmm. The other issue is the old trope of digging stuff out. You're not supposed to dig anything out. Like... we'll see patients that get shot all the time and we don't pull the bullet out because the risk of actually pulling the bullet out is more dangerous than leaving it in. It's very counterintuitive, but that's like a fact of life.
That's across the board, not just in if you get shot by an arrow, don't pull the arrow out. Yeah. It's anything.
I mean, if you get shot by an arrow, eventually that needs to come out, but you can't just yank it out in the field. Because when you pull it out, you're basically destroying all the tissue that's around it too. And even in the hospital, if you got shot and it's not pushing on anything dangerous or potentially cutting off a nerve or a blood vessel, we'll leave it there. You'll set off every metal detector for the rest of your life, but at least you're still setting off metal detectors because you're alive.
And that's because, again, you run the same risk of damaging nerves and just breaking more shit.
I mean, it's the old saying, don't look for problems unless you know what to do with it, and don't create new problems, period.
Now, are bullets no longer lead?
I mean, there are still lead bullets.
Okay.
There's also, like, lead tips, there's copper bullets and all that stuff too, like BBs, but a lot of times it's still lead.
And it's better to leave the lead in than to dig around and pull it out?
But they're usually encapsulated too, though, so that's okay. Long-term lead poisoning from that is probably not going to be too bad, but eventually they'll take it out, but not in an emergent situation.
Okay.
And if it's not causing any issues, leave it.
So, again, with this nitrous scene, how do you have a scene that...
I wouldn't have dug out the bullet.
You wouldn't have just... Okay.
Just leave it.
So what else did they do in the scene?
I remember she just kept digging and digging, and then for such a small procedure, she brought out a lot of bags of medical waste. Like 4 bags of medical waste, and like not just tiny bags, but like full-on garbage bags. And if you look at the scene, there's not a lot of blood that would necessitate that many towels, but also those towels aren't sterile, so that should be getting real infected and gnarly at some point in the movie too.
And unlike Mark Wahlberg, she's a doctor and should know better.
I mean, if we want to go with that, sure.
I mean, the character.
Yeah, the character. Well, she's like she was just his friend and a spotter, so she has some kind of like field experience, but not real heavy medical experience to be doing stuff.
So it's the kind of mistake that someone would make. It just would be a lot more devastating than we see in the movie.
Correct. And like also where the bullet was in his chest, he might have had a collapsed lung and whatnot. So digging around more is making a bigger hole, which essentially can cause the lung to collapse a lot more.
Yeah, holes in the lung, bad.
Holes in the lung, usually frowned upon. It's like a balloon that can't inflate.
I learn new things every day.
I mean, it's an interesting scene. I get all the drama. It makes it fun, but it's really hard not to cringe when you're watching certain things like that. It's like the most uncomfortable scene of just watching back-to-back Mark Wahlberg trying to be a badass, but potentially putting him in way more harm than he should be. But yeah.
Anything else we want to talk about in Shooter?
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, a lot of it's just people... I think just a general trope, too, is anytime someone gets punched one time, they get, like, knocked out immediately. It's really hard.
And it's really bad for you.
It is bad for you because essentially it's like minor brain damage kind of things. But the one punch knockout trope is like one of the weirdest tropes that I've ever seen in like anything. Because people get beat up all the time, but they don't get knocked out right away. It takes time sometimes, or repeated hits. Like you watch enough boxing and MMA, you realize how many hits it does take to get someone knocked out. No one has that strength. And if they do, they probably have broken something at that point already. Because the skull's pretty darn thick. And unless your skull is like an egg, it's going to take a lot.
I was watching Vsauce, where they redid the Home Alone pranks on ballistic dummies. And even the full paint can to the face, would break the nose, might crack the skull.
But nothing else.
Yeah. Well, and probably knock you out from a concussion from the whiplash.
Concussion, yeah. But you're not like down for the whole thing and not able to get up anymore.
And then fine as soon as the next scene's around.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, Shooter, still a fun movie. I would definitely still watch it. It's just, from a medical standpoint, got a lot of things that can still work on.
All right. So that's it for this episode. Unless you've got anything else to add?
I'm good.
We're just starting out, so do us a favor. Leave us a review on iTunes, leave us one on Stitcher, and I'm stealing this from a podcast called Cocaine and Rhinestones, which is awesome. If you like this podcast, please just tell one person about it, tell them to check it out, and we'd really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, guys.